AITA for telling my mother to ask her golden son for help when my dad needed full-time care? I'm Joanna, 32 now, the oldest daughter and until a few years ago, the person my family called whenever anything went wrong. Not the person they called to share good news with first. Not the person they worried about most. I was the person they called when a bill had been forgotten, when Dad's car needed to go to the shop, when Mom needed someone to pick something up, or when my younger brother Kyle had created a problem that everyone wanted fixed without making him feel bad. For years, I carried a spare key to my parents' house on a little blue plastic keychain I bought at a gas station. I used to think it meant trust. Really, it meant availability. If Mom called at 8:30 on a Saturday morning and said, "Can you stop by for just a minute?" I already knew that just a minute could mean 2 hours. If Dad needed a ride, the excuse was always, "You know how he hates asking for help." If Kyle needed something, it was always because he was under pressure. Kyle is 3 years younger than me. He has never been a complete disaster. That would have almost been easier because then nobody could pretend the pattern was subtle. He was just the one who always got extra room. If he forgot something, he was overwhelmed. If I forgot something, I was careless. If he borrowed money, he was in a rough patch. If I asked when he planned to pay me back, Mom told me not to embarrass him. Once I bought Mom flowers for her birthday because Kyle had texted me 2 days earlier saying he was broke and asked if I could cover both of us. I paid for the flowers, picked them up, brought them over, and put both our names on the card because I didn't want drama. Mom hugged Kyle first. "These are beautiful," she told him. "You always know what I like." He glanced at me for half a second. I waited for him to say something. He didn't. Later, when I told him he could at least have corrected her, he said, "Why does everything have to be a scorecard with you?" That became a common sentence in my family. Don't keep score. Don't make things transactional. Don't embarrass your brother. Family doesn't count favors. That philosophy worked very well for the people receiving the favors. Dad George was quieter than Mom. Linda could turn a guilt trip into a full production. Dad usually just sat there, rubbed his jaw and let her talk. That made him seem easier. For a long time I thought it made him kinder. Looking back, it mostly meant he knew how to avoid being blamed for decisions he was perfectly willing to benefit from. About a year before I got sick, Dad's car needed a repair he hadn't budgeted for. He asked if I could put it on my card and said he would pay me back over the next 2 months. I did. 2 months became 6. At Thanksgiving, I quietly asked him if he remembered the balance. Mom heard me. "Joanna," she said, loud enough that Kyle and 2 relatives looked over. "Your father has had a stressful year. Do you really need to bring up money today?" Dad stared at his plate. I said, "I was just asking." Kyle muttered, "Seriously?" Like I had walked in and demanded the deed to the house. I dropped it. That was the old version of me. Not weak exactly, just trained. I believed that being the reasonable one meant absorbing more than everyone else. I believed that if I stayed calm, helpful, and low maintenance long enough, eventually someone would notice that I was doing more than my share. Then Kyle got engaged to Amber. I liked Amber when I first met her. I still do, actually. She wasn't part of our family dynamic, and at the beginning she had no reason to question the version of things Kyle and Mom gave her. The wedding became the center of my mother's universe. She had folders of vendor printouts, screenshots of table settings, color samples, backup color samples, and opinions about details nobody had asked her about. "This wedding is the first nice thing this family has had in years," she said one night over dinner. I looked at Dad. He nodded like that statement made perfect sense. I said, "That's kind of dramatic." Mom frowned. "You know what I mean." I did. She meant Kyle's wedding was an event she could display. It was proof of something. Good family, good son, nice pictures, matching clothes, a room full of people watching her be the mother of the groom. Anything that threatened the wedding was treated like an attack. Kyle overspent early. I knew that because he called me. He didn't say he had blown the budget. He said there had been a cash flow issue. I asked what that meant. He said, "We moved too fast on a few deposits." "How much?" "Why do you need the number?" "Because you're calling me." He sighed. That sigh was very Kyle, like I was making him do paperwork by asking what he wanted from me. Eventually he admitted he was short several $1,000s and could lose one of the larger deposits if he didn't get money into the right account quickly. I told him I couldn't help. At the time, I had no idea how important that conversation would become. He got quiet, then said, "It's fine. Mom said she'd figure something out." I should have wondered where. I didn't. A few months later at 29, I found myself sitting in a medical office with a stack of papers in my lap, while someone explained a serious health problem that would require surgery, follow-up care, time off, and a recovery period I could not realistically pretend was going to be easy. I don't want to turn this into a medical story because the point isn't the diagnosis. The point is that for the first time in my adult life, I could not be the person who handled everything. I was scared. Not movie scene scared. I wasn't screaming or collapsing. I was the kind of scared where you stare too hard at small things. A water stain on the corner of a ceiling tile. The plastic clip on a pin. A line on a form that says patient responsibility in capital letters. I had insurance, but I still had a large amount that would be mine to cover. The billing office emailed me a breakdown with codes I barely understood and a monthly payment plan. I read that email 4 times. Then I called Mom. I didn't ask my parents to pay for everything. I didn't ask them to cancel the wedding. I asked for practical help. A ride on surgery day. Someone to stay nearby for the first couple of nights. Help getting to a follow-up appointment if I couldn't drive. Maybe a temporary loan for part of the bill until I was steady again. Mom was quiet for a few seconds. Then she said, "How much are we talking?" I told her. She made a sound like I had personally raised the price. "Joanna, that's a lot." "I know. Kyle's wedding is in less than 2 months. I know when his wedding is. We have commitments." "I understand. I'm not asking you to cover the whole thing." Dad was in the background. I could hear the television and then his voice asking, "What did they say?" Mom lowered her voice, but not enough. "She wants help with the hospital." I waited. There was a pause. Then Dad said, "Your mother is handling the numbers." That was it. I said, "Can you at least give me a ride the morning of the surgery?" Mom replied, "We have the final venue meeting that week. The surgery is one morning. It's not that simple." I was already tired, and I hadn't even had the surgery yet. I said, "I'm asking for a ride." "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Make it sound like we don't care because we're not dropping everything." I actually laughed once. Not because it was funny. Just came out. "Mom, I'm having surgery. And your brother is getting married. Both things are important." I said nothing. She continued, "You have always been more independent. Kyle needs support right now. He's getting married, not going to war. That attitude is exactly why I don't want you making him feel guilty before the wedding." There it was. Even in a conversation about my hospital care, the person whose emotions needed protecting was Kyle. I ended the call before I said something I couldn't take back. About an hour later, Mom left me a voicemail. I didn't listen immediately. When I finally did, her voice was calm. That almost made it worse. She said she was sorry I was upset. She said everybody was under pressure. She said the wedding had been planned for months. She said I couldn't expect the entire family to rearrange things at the last minute. Then she said, "Your brother's wedding comes first right now. We can deal with your situation after." After. Like my body had scheduled itself poorly. Then she added, "And please don't make Kyle feel guilty before his wedding. He doesn't need that." I sat on the edge of my bed with my phone in my hand. I listened to the voicemail once more. Then I saved it. I don't know why. Maybe some part of me knew that one day she'd claim she had never said it. The next few weeks were ugly in very ordinary ways. I arranged my own rides. An acquaintance from years ago took me to the hospital because the person who had originally agreed had a last-minute work conflict. I remember sitting in the discharge area later with a folder of highlighted post-op instructions on my lap, trying to stay awake while I waited for someone else to pick me up. At home, I ate whatever required the least effort. Canned soup, crackers, toast. I set alarms for medication because there was nobody there to notice if I missed something. I kept a small pill organizer on the kitchen counter next to the hospital papers. I slept badly. I cried twice in the shower because it was the only place where I felt like I could make noise without hearing how empty everything else was. Mom texted. Not to ask what I needed. Mostly to manage me. Hope today was okay. Please don't tell Kyle too many details. He's already stressed. Amber's family is coming in on Thursday. Don't make your brother feel guilty before his wedding. That last one came again by text. I saved that too. Dad called once. He asked how I was. I told him I was sore and tired. He said, "Your mother's been upset about all this." I remember staring at the wall. About me being sick? He hesitated. About the family tension. That was Dad. He could take something concrete and painful and turn it into fog. I asked him, "Did you hear her tell me the wedding came first?" He didn't answer right away. Finally he said, "It was a hard time." That was the closest he came to admitting it. I signed the payment plan. Every month the hospital took money automatically from my account. I watched the balance drop slowly. I kept the billing emails. I kept my bank statements. I did not do this because I was planning revenge. At first, I kept them because I had become obsessive about knowing what I owed and what I had already paid. Control mattered when everything else felt unreliable. Kyle got married. I attended the wedding. Some people have asked me why I went. Because at that point, I was still trying to be the person who didn't ruin things. I wore a dress that didn't press too hard against the healing area. I smiled in photos. I congratulated Amber. Mom told 2 relatives I was doing much better now. Kyle hugged me and said, "I'm glad we got through all the craziness." I nearly laughed again. Instead I said, "Congratulations." At the reception, Mom cried during a speech about how family shows up for each other. I watched her from my table. Something inside me went very quiet. After that I stopped begging. Not because it stopped hurting. Because I finally understood the answer. I didn't cut everyone off in some dramatic explosion. I just became less available. If Mom called and asked me to run an errand, I said no if I didn't want to. If Dad needed a ride, I asked what other options he had tried first. If Kyle asked for money, I said no. The first time I did that without explaining, he texted back, "Wow." Mom noticed. "You've gotten cold," she told me. I said no. I've gotten tired. She called that dramatic. Of course she did. I took the blue spare key off my everyday key ring and put it in a kitchen drawer. I still had it. I just stopped carrying it like a badge. 3 years passed. I got stronger. The bills became smaller. Eventually the largest one was paid off. I saw my family on holidays and occasional dinners. I kept conversations polite and shallow. They adapted to my distance by pretending they had chosen it too. Then Dad's health changed. Again, the medical details aren't the point. He had a serious enough problem that after treatment and discharge, he could not safely manage everything by himself for a while. There were medications, meals, appointments, mobility concerns. Someone needed to keep track of instructions and make sure he wasn't alone too much, especially at first. Mom called me crying. Not soft crying. Linda crying where every breath carried an accusation. "Joanna, I need you." I was standing at my kitchen counter when she said it. That sentence used to activate me instantly. What happened? Where are you? What do you need? This time I waited. She said, "Your father needs full-time help right now. I can't do this alone." Okay. Okay. What have the doctors recommended? They gave us a list. That's not the point. It is the point. The point is your father needs family. I asked whether they'd been given home health referrals. She said yes, but the hourly rates were insane. I asked whether Kyle was helping. Silence. Then, "Kyle has a lot going on." I closed my eyes. There it was. Same script, different emergency. What does he have going on? His work has been stressful. Amber is upset. They have things in their marriage. I am not discussing that with you. You just called me to discuss Dad's care. Because you're his daughter. Kyle is his son too. Joanna, do not start. I almost admired the consistency. She kept going. You can stay here for a while. You know the medications. You're good with schedules. You always handle these things. That was the problem. I always handled these things. What exactly are you asking? For you to move in temporarily. How long is temporarily? We don't know. Days? Weeks? Months? Why are you making this difficult? I'm asking what you're asking me to commit to. She exhaled sharply. After everything we did for you, this is the least you can do. I looked at the drawer where the blue spare key was. Then I said 4 words. Ask your golden son. She went silent. Then she said, excuse me. You heard me. Your father is sick. I know. And you're going to punish him because you're still angry about something from 3 years ago? Something. Joanna. I'm not moving in. She started crying harder. How could you do this to your father? I said, I'm not stopping you from hiring help. I'm not stopping Kyle from helping. I'm not stopping anyone from making a schedule. I'm telling you I am not the default caregiver. You're selfish. Okay. That threw her. She was used to me arguing against the label. I didn't. I said goodbye and ended the call. Within 48 hours, 3 relatives contacted me. Then 5. Then I got an email from Aunt Sonia. Aunt Sonia is the kind of person who believes family problems can be solved if everyone sits down, eats something, and remembers their obligations. Her email wasn't cruel. That almost made it more irritating. She wrote that my father was vulnerable, my mother was overwhelmed, and this was not the time to keep score. She wrote, whatever happened before, your parents did what they could. I read that line twice. Then another text came from my cousin Marcy. Your mom is devastated. I know you guys have history, but this seems harsh. I didn't answer. I knew what mom was doing. She had done it before. She was building the story while I was still deciding whether I wanted to participate in it. In her version, Dad got sick and I refused to help because I was holding a petty grudge about not getting enough attention during Kyle's wedding. She didn't tell them about the surgery ride. She didn't tell them about the voicemail. She didn't tell them about the billing plan. She definitely didn't tell them I had asked for temporary help and been told the wedding came first. At first, I still wasn't going to explain myself to everyone. Then Diane texted me. Diane is one of Mom's cousins. We aren't extremely close, but she has always been kind. Her message said, I don't want to get in the middle, but I hate seeing the family split again after everything. I always hoped the money we sent back then at least helped you get through the worst of it. I stared at the message. Money. I typed. What money? She replied almost immediately. The money for your recovery. I felt cold. I asked her to explain. She called me. Her voice changed the second she realized I genuinely did not know what she was talking about. Joanna, she said slowly, when you had surgery, your mom told us things were expensive. Frank and I sent money. Sonia did too, I think. There were a few people. Sent it where? To your mom. She said she'd give it to you. How much? She told me what she had sent. It was not a tiny amount. I sat down. Diane said, she told us you didn't like people asking questions. She said you were proud about money. I never got that from you. I sent it on Venmo. The note literally said, for Joanna's recovery. My stomach dropped. Can you send me the screenshot? There was a pause. Then, yes. A minute later it arrived. There was Mom's name. There was the date. There was the amount. And under it, for Joanna's recovery. I called Uncle Frank next. I hated making the call, but at that point I had to know. Frank is practical. He doesn't like drama, but he likes missing money even less. When I asked whether he had sent Mom anything during my recovery, he said, yeah. Why? How much? He told me. Another amount I had never received. I asked if he had a record. He said, probably. Then he went quiet. Joanna, what are you telling me? I'm telling you I'm trying to figure out where it went. That evening, Aunt Sonia confirmed she had given Mom cash inside a card, and also paid for what she thought would be one of my follow-up transportation costs. I had paid for that ride myself. Sonia sounded offended. Not at me. At the possibility that she had been lied to. She said, Linda told me you didn't want us contacting you directly. She told me nobody had extra money. There was a long silence. The kind where two people realize they have been standing in different versions of the same history. The next day Kyle texted me. I had not contacted him. His message said, I don't know what you're trying to do, but Mom did what she thought was best. Don't drag Amber into it. I read it 3 times. Then I took a screenshot. I did not ask him what he meant. I did not accuse him. I did not warn him. Because that message told me everything I needed to know. If Kyle truly knew nothing, his response would have been, What are you talking about? Instead, he was already trying to contain the damage. Don't drag Amber into it. That meant there was something Amber didn't know. I went back through old messages. I found the conversation from before the wedding when Kyle had told me about his cash flow issue. I found Mom's text telling me not to make him feel guilty. I found the voicemail. I found my hospital billing email. I downloaded bank statements showing the automatic payments I had made every month after the surgery. I found a text where I had asked Mom if she could pick me up after a follow-up appointment because my ride had canceled. Her response had been, I can't. We have rehearsal dinner details today. Please don't make this a thing. I printed that too. I called Diane and Frank again and asked them to send screenshots of their transfers. They did. Frank's transfer was dated 9 days before a wedding deposit I later found out had been saved after Kyle's overspending. I didn't have access to Mom's bank records, obviously. I wasn't pretending I could prove the exact route of every dollar. But the timing, the transfers, and Kyle's message were enough to establish something very different from the story Mom had been telling. I made a short timeline. Not a dramatic binder. Just a few pages. Dates. Events. Documents. I clipped each piece behind the relevant page. Voicemail transcript. Billing plan. Bank payments. Text. Transfer screenshots. Kyle's message. Then I put everything into a plain envelope. I wasn't preparing revenge. I was preparing for the next lie. Came on Sunday. Mom invited several relatives to dinner. She framed it as a discussion about Dad's care. By then I knew better. When I arrived, there was a casserole dish on the table, a pitcher of iced tea, paper napkins, and enough tension that even the small talk sounded forced. Dad was sitting at the end of the table with a pill organizer beside him and printed discharge instructions folded near his plate. For a second, seeing that punched me right in the chest. The pill organizer. The instructions. The exhaustion. I knew exactly what that kind of recovery felt like. That did not make me want him to suffer. It also did not erase what had happened to me. Kyle and Amber were already there. Kyle barely looked at me. Amber smiled, but it was uncertain. Aunt Sonia gave me a tight hug. Uncle Frank nodded. Diane looked nervous. Mom was moving around the room too fast, refilling things that were already full. We ate for maybe 15 minutes before she started. I invited everyone because families need accountability, she said. My fork stopped halfway to my plate. Kyle stared down. Amber looked at him, then at Mom. Mom folded her hands. Your father cannot manage alone right now. I am doing everything I can. Kyle is helping where he can. I looked at Kyle. He suddenly became very interested in his drink. Mom continued. But Joanna has decided she will not help because she is still angry about something that happened years ago. Aunt Sonia looked at me. Joanna, she said, your father is sick. This isn't the time to keep score. There was that phrase again. Keep score. I set my fork down. Mom looked almost relieved. She thought Sonia had done the hard part for her. I am not asking her for forever, Mom said. I'm asking her to be a daughter. I said, what exactly have you told everyone? Mom's mouth tightened. That your father needs help and you're refusing. Did you tell them why? There is no why that makes this acceptable. That's not an answer. Joanna, stop turning everything into an argument. Frank said, Linda, let her talk. Mom shot him a look. Then she turned back to me. You are punishing us over one bad season of your life. The room went very still. One bad season. I went through a life-altering surgery alone while she protected a wedding deposit, and she dismissed it as one bad season. I reached down, took the envelope from my bag, and put it on the table. Mom stared at it. Kyle's face changed. Not much. Just enough. I said, do you want the version that makes me look cruel, or the version with dates and receipts? Nobody spoke. Mom gave a short, disbelieving laugh. Oh, please. I nodded. Okay. I opened the envelope. Mom's face went white around the mouth. I pulled out the first page. You called me selfish in front of everyone. So I'm going to answer in front of everyone. Don't you dare make this some kind of performance, she said. I looked at her. You already did. I took out my phone. I saved one voicemail from 3 years ago. Mom pushed back from the table. Joanna. I hit play. I did not play the whole message. I didn't need to. Just the part where her voice, calm and clear, said, your brother's wedding comes first right now. We can deal with your situation after. Then I stopped it. Nobody moved. Amber looked at Kyle. Kyle still wouldn't look up. Mom said, that is completely out of context. I slid the printed transcript onto the table. Then here's the context. Dad said quietly, that was a hard time. I turned toward him. I know. Mom snapped, George, don't. That was when Aunt Sonia put on her reading glasses. She reached for the timeline. I let her take it. I said, at 29 I had surgery. I asked for a ride, a few days of help, and maybe a temporary loan. Mom told me the wedding came first. Dad knew I was asking. Dad said Mom was handling the numbers. Dad looked down at the discharge papers beside his plate. I continued. I signed a payment plan. These are the billing emails. These are my bank statements. I paid it myself. Frank leaned forward. Okay, but what about the money? Mom's head jerked toward him. What money? Amber asked. That was the moment everything shifted. I looked at Diane. Did you send money to help me recover? Diane swallowed. Yes. How much? She said the amount. Amber's eyebrows went up. I looked at Frank. Did you? Yes. How much? He told the room. Then Aunt Sonia said, I gave Linda cash. Mom stood up. This is ridiculous. I stayed seated. Sit down, Mom. Do not tell me what to do in my own house. Then stand. Frank held out his hand for the transfer screenshots. I passed them over. Diane said, the note says it was for Joanna. I was managing things, Mom said quickly. There were expenses. There were family expenses. I looked at her. What family expenses? She didn't answer. Sonia's eyes moved over the dates. Then she looked up. Linda, how much of this did you hide from us? Hide? I didn't hide anything. You told me Joanna didn't want help. She didn't. I said, that's a lie. Mom's voice rose. You were difficult. You didn't want people involved. I was asking you for help. You didn't want pity. I wanted a ride home from the hospital. That shut the room up again. I slid another page forward. This is the text where I asked for a ride after a follow-up appointment. Sonia read it. Then she read Mom's response aloud. I can't. We have rehearsal dinner details today. Please don't make this a thing. Mom's face tightened. That was one day. I said, it was a pattern. Amber spoke. Linda, where did the money go? Mom looked at Kyle. It was fast. Half a second. But everybody saw it. Amber saw it most of all. She turned to her husband. Kyle. He rubbed his forehead. Don't. Don't what? This is already getting blown out of proportion. I pulled out the screenshot of his text. He saw it in my hand and leaned back. I read it. Mom did what she thought was best. Don't drag Amber into it. Amber stared at him. What does that mean? Kyle's face went red. It means exactly what it says. No, it doesn't. Amber, look at me. He didn't. She asked very slowly. Did you know? Mom interrupted. Kyle was under tremendous pressure before the wedding. Amber's head snapped toward her. I didn't ask you. That was the first moment all night when Mom actually looked unsure. Amber turned back to Kyle. Did you know your mom had money that relatives sent for Joanna? Kyle said. I knew there was money moving around. Moving around? I didn't know all the details. Did our wedding use any of it? He said nothing. Amber stood up. Her chair scraped against the floor. Did our wedding use money people sent for her hospital recovery? Kyle said. We were going to lose the deposit. It was such a small sentence. No shouting. No dramatic confession. Just a miserable little sentence that told the truth. Amber covered her mouth. Sonia whispered, Oh my God. Frank sat back and stared at Mom. Diane's face turned red. Mom started talking quickly. It wasn't like that. Kyle had already committed. There were contracts. If we lost the deposit, all that money would have been wasted. Joanna had insurance. I actually felt my hands go cold. Say that again. Mom looked at me. You had insurance. I laughed once. The same ugly little laugh from 3 years earlier. I had insurance, so the money people sent to help me became wedding money? I was trying to keep the family together. No, you were trying to keep the wedding intact. The wedding mattered. So did I. That was the loudest my voice got all night. Mom blinked. I lowered it again. So did I. Dad finally spoke. I didn't know it was that bad. I turned to him. He looked smaller than I remembered. For a moment I hated that I still felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the phone call. The television in the background. His voice saying Mom was handling the numbers. I said, You knew I was asking for help. I didn't know everything. You knew enough. Your mother was trying to keep everyone together. You didn't have to be the loudest person in the room to abandon me. You just had to stay quiet when it mattered. He looked away. Mom said, Don't speak to your father like that when he's sick. I looked at her. When I was sick, you told everyone not to make Kyle feel guilty. She started crying. Real tears, I think. But tears and accountability are not the same thing. Why are you doing this to me in front of everyone? She asked. I said, No, you humiliated me with a lie. I'm correcting the record with proof. She shook her head. I am your mother. And I'm your daughter. That didn't stop you. Kyle pushed his plate away. This isn't fair. Frank stared at him. Which part? Kyle looked around the table like he could find an exit that wasn't physical. I was under pressure. I said, You were getting married. You don't understand. I understand you accepted money that wasn't meant for you. I didn't steal anything. I didn't say you personally took it. You are acting like I planned this. I am saying you knew enough to text me not to tell your wife. Amber turned toward him again. That's the part I'm stuck on too. Kyle's face changed. Amber, come on. No. I was trying to protect us. From what? The truth. Mom said. This is exactly why I told Joanna not to drag you into it. Amber looked at her. That is not helping. I reached into the envelope and pulled out one more set of papers. A home health aid estimate. The rates were broken down by hours and weekly totals. Under it was a basic caregiving schedule based on the discharge instructions Mom had already sent me. Medication times. Meal prep. Rides. Appointments. Overnight coverage. I slid it toward Kyle. He stared at it. I said, You got the wedding. Now you get the calendar. He looked up at me. What is that supposed to mean? It means Dad needs care. You're his son. Mom says family shows up. This is your revenge? No. This is arithmetic. Frank actually coughed into his hand to hide what might have been a laugh. I continued. If full-time home care is too expensive, then the family can divide hours or divide cost. But I am not moving in. Mom said. I can't believe you're sitting there talking about shifts like your father is a burden. I looked at the pill organizer beside him. I am talking about shifts because he's a person with actual care needs. That requires a real plan, not guilt. Sonia nodded slowly. That surprised me. I said, I'm not leaving Dad without options. I'm leaving you without a scapegoat. Mom wiped her face. After everything we did for you. I reached for the billing statement. This is what you did for me. She looked away. Dad was silent again. I said, I have 4 boundaries. I'm saying them once. Mom scoffed, but nobody else interrupted. I will not move in here. Kyle leaned back. I will not pay for Dad's care. Mom opened her mouth. I raised one hand. Third, any money involving me, any repayment, any claim that money was sent to me or for me, gets documented in writing. Frank nodded. Fourth, if either of you tells relatives another lie about why I am not the caregiver, I will send the timeline and the supporting proof to whoever you involved. I am not posting it online. I am not broadcasting it to strangers. But I will not protect a false version of this anymore. Mom stared at me. You're threatening us. No. I'm telling you how I will respond. Sonia took off her glasses. We judged her too fast. Mom looked at her like she'd been slapped. Sonia. No, Sonia said. You told us she was holding a grudge because you couldn't help enough during the wedding. You did not tell us you told her the wedding came first. You did not tell us she was paying a loan. And you definitely did not tell us you took money we sent for her. I didn't take it. Frank said. Then show us where it went. Mom's mouth opened. Closed. That was enough. Diane looked at me. I'm sorry. I nodded once. I wasn't ready to make her feel better about it. Amber walked away from the table and stood near the kitchen counter. Kyle followed. Can we not do this here? He whispered. She turned on him. Apparently everybody else already did everything here except tell me the truth. He reached for her arm. She stepped back. Don't. Mom started crying harder. Dad rubbed his face. For a second, the whole dinner dissolved into overlapping voices. Frank wanted bank statements. Sonia wanted dates. Diane wanted to know whether her transfer had gone directly toward the deposit. Kyle kept saying there had been a cash problem, and he didn't know where every dollar came from. Mom kept insisting she had been making impossible choices. I sat there and watched. Years earlier, I would have tried to calm everyone down. I would have collected plates. I would have told Amber not to make a decision while angry. I would have told Frank we'd figure it out later. I would have protected Dad from stress. I would have helped Mom clean up the disaster she created. That night, I did none of it. Eventually, Dad said my name. Joanna. I looked at him. He said, Can we talk? Now. Please. We moved a few feet away, not private enough to become another secret. He looked exhausted. I don't want you thinking I didn't care. I said, Then don't tell me what you wanted. Tell me what you did. He looked down. I should have stepped in. Yes. I thought your mother was handling it. You keep saying that like handing her the decision removed you from it. I was trying not to make things worse. For who? He didn't answer. I said, Dad, I am not going to let you go without care. I will send information. I will help make sure everybody has the same list of services. If you want to talk to me directly about what the doctor said, you can. But I am not moving in. And I'm not becoming responsible for managing this family again. He nodded slowly. Then he said, I'm sorry. It wasn't a perfect apology. It didn't erase anything. But it was the first time he said the words without adding, but your mother. I said, I heard you. That was all I could give him. When I left, Amber was in the driveway on the phone. Kyle was inside. Mom had stopped crying and started getting angry, which was more familiar territory for her. Sonia walked me to my car. She said, I really am sorry. I unlocked the door. She added, I thought you were being cruel. I know. Why didn't you tell us before? I thought about that. Because I was tired of making a case for why I deserved basic care. She looked ashamed. I didn't soften it. Then she said, "We should have asked you." Yes. I drove home. My phone lit up the whole way. I didn't answer. The next morning, Marcy texted me. Her message was longer than usual. She said Mom had given everyone the impression I refused help during my surgery because I wanted privacy. She admitted she had judged me. She apologized for the email she had sent me. I wrote back, "Thank you for saying that." No heart emoji. No instant forgiveness speech. Just thank you. Uncle Frank asked for copies of the transfer screenshots. Diane already had hers. Sonia said she was looking through old bank records. A couple of relatives stayed quiet. One later told me that even if Mom had been wrong, I was too cold at dinner. I can live with that. If their standard for a good daughter requires me to accept public lies and unpaid full-time caregiving, then I am comfortable disappointing them. 3 days after dinner, Mom and Kyle each received a certified letter. It wasn't a lawsuit. I wasn't pretending I had hired a team of attorneys. The letter simply documented what I had learned, listed the amounts relatives had confirmed, and requested either repayment or a written repayment agreement for the money that had been intended for my recovery and redirected. I copied the relatives who had provided proof of their transfers. Frank loved that part. Mom called 8 times. I did not answer. Then she texted, "You are destroying this family over money." I replied once, "No, I'm documenting money you hid." She sent 3 more messages. I didn't respond. Kyle called. I let it go to voicemail. His message was angry at first, then defensive, then strangely pleading. He said Amber had gone to stay with someone else for a few days. He said I had dropped a grenade into his marriage. I texted back, "Your wife asked if you knew." "You did." He responded, "I didn't know everything." I wrote, "Then tell her exactly what you did know." That was the last message I sent him that week. Amber contacted me separately 2 days later. She apologized for believing I was just distant and bitter. I told her she didn't owe me an apology for not knowing what people had intentionally kept from her. She asked one question. "Did you know before the wedding?" "No." "Would you have told me?" I thought about it. "If I had known the money was mine, yes." She said, "Okay." I didn't ask what she planned to do with Kyle. That was her marriage, not my job. Dad's care plan eventually became what it should have been from the beginning. A plan. Not a daughter-shaped hole everyone expected me to fill. Kyle took 2 evening shifts a week. Mom handled mornings. A paid aide covered several daytime blocks. Frank agreed to help with transportation twice a month. Sonia took 1 appointment. They also applied for every assistance program the hospital's social worker recommended. Turns out when people stop assuming one woman will quietly do everything for free, they become much more creative. Kyle hated the schedule. The first week he texted me, "Do you know how hard it is to keep track of all these medication times?" I stared at that message for a while. Then I typed, "Yes." Nothing else. He didn't reply. The money issue took longer. Mom first claimed she had used some of it on general family support while I was sick. When Frank asked her to define that, her explanation changed. Then she admitted that a significant portion had been used to cover the wedding deposit problem. Kyle agreed to repay part of it over time because he had directly benefited. Mom signed a repayment agreement for the rest. It wasn't every dollar immediately. It wasn't some dramatic courtroom victory. It was paperwork, monthly amounts, due dates, signatures. Real consequences usually look less exciting than shouting. I preferred it that way. Dad called me himself about 2 weeks after the dinner. Not Mom. Him. He asked if I could explain one section of his discharge instructions, because he didn't understand whether a follow-up appointment needed to happen before a medication change. I told him. Then I said, "You should confirm that with the doctor's office." He said, "I will." Before we hung up, he said, "I should have come to the hospital for you." I was quiet. He said, "I knew you needed us." I let your mother decide what mattered. That was harder to hear than his first apology, because it was finally accurate. I said, yes, you did. He said, I'm sorry. I believed he was sorry. I still did not volunteer to move in. Regret does not automatically create access. Mom's apologies were different. She sent messages that said things like, I am sorry you felt unsupported. Then, I was trying to save your brother's wedding. Then, you don't understand what I was carrying. Then, I made mistakes, but no mother deserves what you did at that dinner. I did not argue line by line. Eventually I sent one response. You are allowed to feel embarrassed. I am not going to carry that embarrassment for you. After that, I muted her for a month. I also started therapy. Not because I was falling apart. Because I realized I had spent most of my adult life measuring my value by how useful I could be without needing anything back. That habit had followed me even after I stopped doing errands for my family. I overexplained my nose. I felt guilty when people were disappointed. I mistook exhaustion for responsibility. Therapy did not turn me into some perfectly healed person. I still sometimes see Mom's name on my phone and feel the old reflex. Answer. Fix it. Make everybody calm. The difference is I notice the reflex now. A few weeks after the dinner, I opened the kitchen drawer and found the blue spare key keychain. I held it in my hand. It was scratched and cheap and completely ordinary. For years, I had carried it everywhere because I thought being the person who could always get into my parents' house meant I belonged there in some special way. Now it looked like what it had always been. A key. Not a contract. Not a duty schedule. Not proof of love. I put it back in the drawer. Then I silenced my phone, made coffee, and sat at my table while the morning stayed quiet. Dad had care. Mom had a repayment agreement. Kyle had a caregiving calendar. Amber had the truth. My relatives had the same timeline I did. And I was no longer the family emergency contact just because everyone had gotten used to me saying yes. I didn't abandon my family. I finally stopped abandoning myself. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.